Bismillah Rahman Rahim. So today there is more bad news from the Middle East, especially from a very beautiful country neighboring Israel and Syria. The area of the Levant is on fire, as it has been for most of its history since the French and the British left the Middle East burning. And we see what's going on in this part of the world. The focus has suddenly shifted from Gaza to Lebanon in the last 48 hours. Why? Because of some explosions that have taken people by surprise. And what are these explosions? These explosions are explosions related to pagers. Pagers. Are pagers supposed to explode? Well, we will see whether they are supposed to explode or not. And today, about 1 hour ago, there is news that there has been a series of explosions in the inventory of cellular mobile phones. What great things to cause explosions. And a lot of people are looking at their mobile phones now and wondering when will the next explosion take place. So don't worry, the next explosion will not take place in your hands because we will try to understand the situation in its historical perspective. So what happened was that the Arabs or the Palestinians or the people of the Levant, when we talk about the Levant, we are talking about the country of Syria or Sham, and we are talking about Lebanon, and we are talking about the old Transjordan, which is now Jordan, and we are talking about that unfortunate place in the world called Palestine, and which is now Israel and Palestine. So, so when the Western people normally talk about it, they normally call it the Middle East. So for them, the whole of the Middle East is what? The whole of the Middle East is Israel and Palestine. But we know that this is not the Middle East. In fact, the entire area is a small part of the Middle East called the Levant. So it so happened that there was an engineer in what is now the West Bank. It started off as a West Bank story. By the way, the West Bank and the West Bank is called the West Bank by the international community for one reason, because it was briefly occupied by Jordan, and because it is on the west bank of the Jordan River. Jordan is on the east side of the Jordan River, and the West Bank, where Jerusalem is, that is located on the west side of the Jordan River. That's why it came to be known as the West Bank. This is a term that Muslims use. This is a term that Arabs use. This is a term that the United Nations uses. The Israelis don't call it the West Bank at all. For the Israelis, this is not the West Bank. In fact, the 12 tribes of Israel, they divided themselves into two competing kingdoms. One was the kingdom of Samaria, and the other was the kingdom of Judea. And this happened very recently, just 3,000 years ago. So, the Israelis continue to call it that. And this is the biblical heartland. The West Bank. The people of the West Bank were actually in a much greater danger. The people, the Palestinians. I call the Palestinian people. I understand that the world does not consider them humans, but to me they are people. So they were in the greatest danger before October 7. Okay, we need to thank certain actors in the story for making a comparatively safer place, Gaza, into the hell that it is today. But the real danger that was faced was faced by the people of the West Bank, because it was they who were living under a very dangerous kind of occupation. So we are not here to discuss the demography of the West Bank right now and the strategic military situation of the West Bank right now. We're just considering how mobiles explode and why they explode. So Israel has a long history of exploding mobile phones. So it so happened that in the West Bank there was this young man who was born in 1966, and his name was Yahya Ayash. People in the Muslim world do not know much about Yahya Ayash, but he's very, very well known in Israel. So Yahya Ayash was an engineer by education, and he wanted to go to Jordan to study engineering further. And Israel stopped him. He was not allowed to go. For what reason? We do not know. Maybe because it goes against the narrative that all Palestinians are brutes and they don't go to universities. So whatever the reason was. So obviously that filled him with a lot of anger, very unjustified. There's no need to keep your frustrations bundled up and to take them out on occasions on innocent people. There's no two things about that. Absolutely, it's reprehensible. But uh, for every action, there is an equal and sometimes more than powerfully opposite reaction. So that's exactly what happened in the case of Yahya Ayash, and started using his ability to make things. He started using that ability into making suicide jackets. And so there were a series of suicide bombings. These things happen across generations. So when we're talking about generations of terrorists, or the generation of people who use violence to achieve their objectives, the generations do not last 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. No, 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 no. One generation passes in 2 years, 3 years. So this Jaya Ayash is in the first generation of suicide engineers. He's in the business of making these suicide jackets. He is initially in the Qassam Brigade, but that Qassam Brigade is in the West Bank. Now you need to keep in mind the Qassam Brigade belongs to Hamas, and there was a militant wing in Fatah, which is the other organization, and that their militant wing was the Al-Aqsa Martyrs Brigade. So he is in the Qassam Brigades, and he is doing this. And the suicide bombing shocks no one more than the Palestinians, because obviously Palestinians are Muslims, and before 1996, before 1995, 1994, 1995, these suicide bombings are unthinkable. In fact, suicide bombings only pick up after a Brooklyn Jew massacres worshippers in Al Khalil. Before that, they were relatively unheard of in Palestine. They originated mostly in Sri Lanka. In any case, Israel decided that they had to get rid of this suicide engineer. So now what do? They knew that Mr. Ayash visits one of his cousins. I believe his name was Osama Hamad. Osama Hamad used to live in the occupied territories at the time. Please keep in mind at that time both Gaza and the West Bank are occupied territories, and he lives in these occupied territories. And he's an old friend of Yahya Ayash, so Yahya Ayash does come to visit him, and that is where the Israelis contacted the uncle of Hamad. And just as we exchange mobile phones as gifts today, the system was there in those days as well. The same culture was there. Remember, in those days, we used to have those Nokia 3310 phone, and people were quite crazy about it. So they used to exchange gifts, and they used to give each other those phones. So Israel approaches Osama Hamad's uncle, and asks him to give a phone to his nephew to be given as a present to Yahya Ayash. He was told that this phone is bugged and that Israel wanted to listen in to what Ayash's activities were, who he was speaking to, and stuff like that. What they did not know was that the mobile phone was not really a mobile phone. Its purpose was not really to bug anyone or to keep anyone under surveillance. The mobile phone was actually an RDX-13 bomb. It just looked like a mobile phone. It just worked like a mobile phone. It just got connected to the satellite like a mobile phone. But in reality, it was a bomb. So every time things are being given in that area, they look one thing and they may be something completely different. There's nothing new about it. The only thing is we don't remember history. This is exactly what Israel is capable of doing. So no problem at all. The gift is given, and then there was a bugging software in it, and Israel listened in, and they confirmed that the person who has the mobile phone in his possession is indeed Yahya Yash. On the 5th of January 1996, early in the morning, a bell rings on Yahya Ayash's phone. Yahya Ayash picks up the phone and says, hello. Just at that moment, the Israelis who are listening in throughout shut down the entire mobile network throughout the occupied territories, and they press a button which detonates that one bomb. The bomb explodes and the shrapnel cuts into the skull of Yahya Yash, killing him instantly. So please don't be surprised that bombs are being used, that mobile phones are being used as bombs. They have been used like this for the past several years.